like to, first of all, thank the Coquitlam's Universal Accessibility Advisory Committee for offering to host 2 speakers and opening up part of our meeting to the public. It all came together so well, and Elaine Willis was sort of most helpful and creative and encouraging of having the opportunity in the community to have these 2 speakers available to us so that we can learn what we can from their experience. So we have 2 Pauls. The first Paul, who's going to speak with us for about half an hour, is Paul Caune. Oh, and I'm Selena Robinson, Councillor, City of Coquitlam, and Chair of the Universal Accessibility Advisory Committee. I should say who I am first. This is Paul. He was born with muscular dystrophy in 1968 and lived with his family in North Vancouver until he was 28 years old when he moved into a group home. He lived there until Vancouver Coastal Health Authority refused to fund his minimal extra support needed by the group home for his care. Soon, Paul found himself homeless with no appropriate housing that would meet his needs on the North Shore. After 6 months, Vancouver Coastal Health Authority informed him that he had to move to George Pearson Centre, a 120-bed extended care facility in southeast Vancouver, a 45-minute drive from his family and community. Against his wishes, and with the promise of finding suitable housing on the North Shore, Paul relented and moved to George Pearson, a less than adequate housing solution. Paul has shared his story of inadequate housing, poor treatment at George Pearson, and of unrelenting self-advocacy. He has taken his experience and founded Civil Rights Now, a nonpartisan, volunteer, nonprofit society advocating for public policy changes that will provide British Columbians with disabilities equal access to the equality provisions of Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Please join me in welcoming Paul Caune.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson, and thank you to Civil Rights Now. Would like to thank the Universal Accessibility Advisory Committee for inviting myself and Mr. Gauthier here tonight. And we'd also like to thank the City of Coquitlam for providing us with this wonderful venue. Have slide number 1, please. Civil Rights Now is a volunteer, nonpartisan, not-for-profit society with a single purpose. Slide number 2, please. To get laws passed that give Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms real force and effect in the lives of BC voters with disabilities. Slide 3, please. Section 15 of Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms proclaims every individual is equal before and under the law, and has the right to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, and in particular without discrimination based on mental or physical disability. This right is subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. For most of the history of British Columbia, our legislators decided in the event citizens are born or become disabled, they will be provided the services they need to survive. However, these essential services were delivered only in a few sites throughout the province, such as the Woodlands and Jericho School Institution. Did the Canadian citizens living in the Woodlands and Jericho institutions get equal benefit and equal protection from the law? The evidence in various government reports on the Woodlands and Jericho institutions documenting rapes, beatings, injuries, neglect, and deaths from the 1890s to the 1990s forces one to conclude, no. But that's the not very distant past. What about the present? Slide number 4, please. This is some discussion paper on community living services by the BC Ministry of Children and Family Development, October 2001. Quote, aside from affordability, our approach has often been characterized as disenfranchising and disempowering those who best know what services and supports are required for persons with developmental disabilities to independence, their families, their care providers, and their communities. We have often imposed ourselves in ways that have too often proven to be unhealthy and unsustainable. This applies not just to people with developmental disabilities, it applies to people with all disabilities in the history of British Columbia. Slide number 5, please. From the strategic plan of the BC government in 2005, quote, some population groups, such as people with disabilities, children and youth with special needs, children and youth at risk, people with mental health disorders, addictions, or problematic substance use, and seniors face multiple barriers to improving their social and economic well-being. Overcoming these barriers requires focused interventions that are integrated and client-centered. In 2005, the same year the BC government strategic plan stated the barriers to improving my social and economic well-being required a focused intervention that was centered around me. The Vancouver Coastal Health Authority coerced me out of my home community into George Pearson Centre, a nursing home in Vancouver, a city that boasts that it's the most accessible community in Canada. While I was there in 2006, some of the Pearson staff physically abused me. I was also subjected to an abuse of power, which involved the violation of the Healthcare Consent Act. When I complained about this violation to the relevant Vancouver Coastal Health civil servant, she told me, even if I come to the same conclusion you have that so-and-so violated the Healthcare Consent Act, I will do nothing. Those were her exact words. I will do nothing. Life at Pearson is best summed up in the words of an elderly woman who I was friends with when I was there, who lived there for 20 years. We can't say what really goes on here, because if we do, the staff will retaliate against us. That was the word she used, retaliate. That elderly Canadian did receive food, shelter, and personal care from her government. But she could not tell the truth about her own home inside her own home. She was not living in a free and democratic society. Slide number 6, please. This is a typical room at Pearson. Slide number 7, please. This is from a 2008 report based on interviews with 46 out of the 120 Pearson residents. Quote, some residents did not feel able, physically or emotionally, to challenge staff to try and change things. They did not want to upset the status quo. Residents also discussed their fear of negative consequences if they complained too much or made a fuss. Over the last year, Civil Rights Now has talked with hundreds of voters with disabilities and their families from across British Columbia. Fear runs like a crimson thread through all these conversations. Voters with disabilities told us that government, unions, businesses, and service providers abuse and bully them almost every day in British Columbia, and they are afraid of retaliation. They are afraid of retaliation if they speak up. The world they live in is not a free and democratic society. This is why Civil Rights Now thinks voters with disabilities need legislation that, slide number 8, please. 1, gives them individualized funding. 2, funds test cases involving the civil rights. 3, ensures the Charter of Rights and Freedoms has real force and effect in their lives. BC voters with disabilities need the golden rule. What is the golden rule? Whoever controls the gold makes the rules. If British Columbian voters with disabilities control the government dollars allocated to support them, they would get the services they need to live in freedom and dignity. Individualized funding puts voters with disabilities in charge of their own lives instead of paternalistic, indifferent, or overburdened civil servants and service providers. Individualized funding gives voters with disabilities leverage over the service providers because the service providers would know these voters could take their money wherever they wanted. This forces healthy competition between the service providers to the advantage of voters with disabilities. If they control the money, voters with disabilities will have the power to reward innovative service providers who create affordable, accessible housing, provide professional personal care, and use assistive technology creatively, for example. When voters with disabilities or working and middle-class parents of children with disabilities have control of the money, does any rational decision maker think they would choose to reward a service provider such as Woodlands, Jericho, or George Pearson Center? Would voters with disabilities who are dependent on ventilators, for example, put themselves in the Care Life Fleetwood facility in Surrey, where a voter died in 2010 because of the negligence of its staff? If voters with disabilities had ironclad control of the gold, wouldn't they rather put themselves in a home like mine, a 700 square foot subsidized apartment in a market rate building with a proper personal care support? In addition, obviously, individualized funding will eliminate a lot of administrative overhead in the health authorities, Ministry of Family and Child Development, Community Living BC, and service providers. Obviously, individualized funding is much less costly to taxpayers than the capital, maintenance, operating, and legal settlement costs of the Woodlands, Jericho, and hopefully one day George Pearson institutions. However, the golden rule is not enough. When your civil rights are violated, you don't need a good hug. You need a good lawyer. Because most British Columbians with disabilities cannot pay for a good lawyer, they have no way to protect their civil rights, which are frequently violated by government, unions, and businesses. You don't have a civil right if you don't have a remedy to enforce it. The lawyers have a phrase, there's no right without a remedy. This is why BC voters with disabilities need funding for test cases involving their civil rights to get access to justice. If you meet those various forces in the society that causes harm to people with disabilities in civil court, it sets a precedent which opens up a wedge for other people with disabilities. Together, individualized funding and funding for test cases involving their civil rights will give voters with disabilities the tools to get equal benefit and equal protection from the law. Civil Rights Now will persuade the politicians to pass such laws in British Columbia. How? To repeat what I said at the beginning of my presentation, legislators decided the best thing for you, if you were born with a disability or become disabled, is to be put into dangerous, unhealthy, unsustainable warehouses, such as Woodlands, Jericho, and George Pearson Center. But Woodlands is no more. Why? Because voters who had children in there, who knew their children were abused there, who had the common sense to know that such institutions, by their very nature, have no place in a free and democratic society. Acting with clarity, focus, and persistence demanded the government shut it down. This led to community living, which on balance has made our province a better place. Slide number 10, please. Politicians see the light when they feel the heat. Slide number 11, please. Join civil rights now, and together we'll turn up the heat. Thank you.
It's feeling rather warm in here. But I appreciate, I've got the mic, so if anyone has any questions.
Yes, any questions, please ask.
I'll bring the mic to you.
Have you any lawyers now that are involved with civil rights now, should someone have a question or need legal assistance?
We don't refer people to lawyers for individual cases. We are only focuses on getting legislation passed. So we wouldn't be able to do that.
Paul, maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about how we can get involved. You talked about,
Sure.
Joining Civil Rights Now,
Sure.
which is fantastic. What can we do to move this cause forward? Because you've got such an important cause.
Thank you. Well, that's a great question, Paul. What you can do is what the Access Committee has done today, which is organize meetings for us. We need to get the word out about our idea to as many people as possible. We've been spreading the word since May of last year. We had a good start. We announced our launch on the Bill Good Show last year, and I've been making the rounds of alternative radio and all that. And you can get me in front of a bunch of people, and I'll make my pitch about individualized funding and the need. I'll make my pitch about what people with disabilities need in BC, and what I think the solutions are. And that's the biggest thing you can do right now. Get me in front of as many people as possible, and I'll make my pitch.
Got another question over here.
And you can contact us at our website is civilrightsnow.ca, and on the handout we have the contact information on there too, if you're interested in. Yes, sir.
About 10 years ago, I had an issue with the government where I earned something like $15 or $100 or something like that, and I did not declare it. Mm-hmm. And they wanted me to pay it back. And so I asked a friend to come with me to this meeting with this guy. And my friend said, excuse me, my friend said, isn't the government supposed to help people like him, pointing to me, instead of being a pain to them?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I think you've that last comment you made is and unfortunately indicative of the way government services have been delivered to people with disabilities for most of the history of British Columbia, which is, I mean, you look at the prevalence of fraud. There's way more fraud in the Vancouver Stock Exchange than there ever been in people with disability community. But we're much more heavily regulated. The way the services are delivered in a way that, as I outlined in my speech, pushes you out, it keeps you out of a free and democratic society. I mean, the PWD, for example, is a poverty trap. You know, the amount of money you can make, the exemption you can make, $500 a month, and so on, the way historically it's been administered, it's a poverty trap. You can't make the leap from government dependence to self-sufficiency, for example. And the sort of petty bureaucratic tyranny that you just described, again, it's indicative of 100 years of services and how services have been delivered in BC, and that's why we need to eliminate as much of that as possible, and that's why we propose the individualized lending as a means towards that end. Anyway, I'm going on, sorry.
Actually, I have a question for you, Paul. You mentioned that one of the ways that we could support Civil Rights Now is to get you out and get the story out and get the message out. Yes. I'm wondering if you've encouraged folks to speak with their respective MLAs and to write letters to that effect, as long as they're sticking with sort of the 3 points that you've outlined.
We that's our intention, but we don't want to start doing that until we have enough people supporting us. You know how it is. If I showed up in MLA's office and I pitched my idea, just like it now, most likely they'll say, they're interesting as gone. And then as soon as I leave the room, they'll throw my idea in the garbage can. But if I show up and I say, I've been all across the province, I've talked to thousands of people, and hundreds of them think this is a good idea, they'll start counting votes as soon as I leave the room. And so we haven't reached that stage yet. And when we do, because it doesn't matter, I'm sure you all know this, it doesn't matter if you're right. Your idea has to have clout, and what gives you clout is numbers. And so when we get to that point, we will encourage people to directly go to their MLAs.
And do you have a way of communicating with us when you're ready to do that? So those people who are paying attention and are prepared to act, that you'll be able to communicate with
Yeah, you can
them?
contact us at civilrightsnow@yahoo.ca. The contact information is on the handout that Matthew gave you guys. You can contact me directly and tell me you want to help, and we'll start from there.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Selena, I actually have a question for you. I know that in Port Moody there are accessibility awards given every year to different firms for, like stores and institutions, and I just don't know if that's the case and what is going on in Coquitlam. So maybe you could tell us what is happening in Coquitlam in terms of accessibility.
We've had a couple of years of what was called the Disabilities Advisory Committee, and this year we changed the name because we didn't want it to be about disabilities, we want it to be about accessibility. So we've started to change our language. We have done accessibility awards for a number of years. However, they were starting to feel a little bit hollow because we were rewarding people for meeting code, and you have to meet code. And so it's been, so taking a look. And so this year we've actually taken a hiatus from our accessibility awards because we want to make sure that we're really rewarding and acknowledging people who really have made a difference and have either gone out of their way and made particular effort to make sure that their place of business, worship, whatever it is, has really gone to the point of really true accessibility rather than meeting code, which is something that they're obligated to do. So we've taken a year's hiatus to rework that. But other things that we've started to do as a city is to take a look at our pedestrian and our wheel accessibility sidewalks. We have some very old sidewalks on steep slopes, and we're taking a look at that. And we've taken a look at our standards, and we want to make sure that we meet current standards rather than standards that may have been established years ago. So there's a whole bunch of those things. And the last thing that we've been pushing is asking developers to build adaptable housing and accessible housing. And I've been really impressed with when we do ask them to do that, they say, well, we could do a couple of units and see what the market says. So it's market housing, but at least it's available and on the market for those who want to make use of it. So we're starting to see that happen as well.
Selena, I might make a suggestion about housing. You should investigate an organization called the Vancouver Resource Society. They've been around since 1971, and they're very innovative creator of housing for people with disabilities, and they have a unique strategic vision that allows them to shape the environment that many service providers unfortunately haven't been able to do. And just, you can, I'll full disclosure, I live in a VRS place, so I know how good at they are at what they're doing, so you might want to talk to them, those guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One of the things, we have an opportunity here in Coquitlam with the Evergreen line, hopefully coming, to really do some really interesting housing opportunities around those stations, because that really opens the doors. When there's accessibility to travel and the transit system, then, and if housing is right there, then it really opens up the world in a huge way. So we want to make sure that we use our opportunities around the Evergreen line to make sure that we have some housing available.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you for that.
having affordable, accessible housing in a good neighborhood is the difference between, a real home and, let's say, Pearson, which is essentially a prison, right? And you can't have real privacy. You can't have a life with dignity if you don't have your own place. I know this from personal experience, and I would urge the city of Coquitlam to do everything within its power to make that happen, make that kind of housing happen in their municipality. Anyway, my time's up, so thank you for hearing me out tonight.
Thank you, Paul.